Hello, hope you're doing great. This is Mariapani Rajan, your friendly software engineer. And in this video, we're going to talk about object-oriented programming. Now, object-oriented programming is just another style of programming. So that means any application that you develop using the object-oriented programming style, you could have also created using a non-object oriented programming style, such as a functional programming style, or even just a linear programming style where you just list out one instruction after the other. Now, the issue with the other programming styles, right, especially the linear programming style where you're just like writing one instruction after the other, that's very archaic, right? So there you won't be able to build more interesting applications because the code management is going to be a bit of a hassle because you're just writing one instruction after the other, and there might be a lot of code duplications that you introduce. And the whole reason why we have functional programming is so that we don't need to repeat ourselves, right? Like we could have the blocks of instructions that we're going to reuse put together inside a function, and we could keep calling those functions again and again whenever they are required and not have to repeat those codes again and again. Now, what makes this object oriented programming special compared to either the functional programming or just a linear programming style is that this object oriented programming style is more close to us, the human beings, and the world we live in. Because in this world, right, when you look around, anything and everything that you see is an object, right? Now, what do we mean by an object? An object is an entity that has properties attached to it. For example, this remote control, it's an object. Why do we call it as an object? Because it's an entity that has properties attached to it. Now, this entity is rectangular in shape, and it's white in color, and it's got a green color button over here, and it's got a display over here. So the things that we use to describe this entity, right, they are the properties of this entity. And since this entity has a bunch of properties attached to it, it becomes an object. So when you think about it, if I want to create another remote control like this, all I need to know is just the length, and I need to know the breadth and then the height, right? If I know the length, breadth, and height, which are these properties of this particular, entity, I could very well create, a block, a rectangular block similar to this, right? And if I know that the color of this block is supposed to be white, I could also set the color to be white in the block that I create. And similarly, if I know the dimension of the buttons and the color and the size of the display and so on, if I just know all the properties of this particular entity, I could very much create another object just like this, right? So in a sense, if I know the blueprint, right, if I know the blueprint of creating a remote control, I could just create as many remote controls as I want. That's what is done even when you build a house, right? So first of all, the architect creates just the blueprint. Now, once the blueprint is ready, you can just create how many ever houses you want based on that blueprint. And this principle is what is applied, for anything and everything that we see in this world, right? So even for us human beings, right? So for example, why would you say that I am a human being, right? So the reason why you would classify me as a human being, right, why you would consider me as a human being object is because, like a human being, what are the properties of a human being? It'll have one head, and it'll have, maybe some level of intelligence, and it'll have, like two hands, and and it will wear some clothes and so on. So you have these properties attached to this entity, right, this form. And when any other entity has the same properties, if another entity also is there which has, the skin, and it has, two eyes, and hair and head, and hands and intelligence and so on, you can classify that entity also to be as a human. So that's how you know that object is a human, rather than a cow or a monkey. So this principle of attaching properties to an entity to create an object is is so fundamental, and it's so natural to us human beings. And so this is the design, this is the idea behind creating this new style of programming called object oriented programming. When you think about the genesis of software engineering, how software engineering started out, it was basically a series of instruction, a linear series of instructions that was like on a punch card and fed into a machine, and you got the result from the machine on that punch card, right? And then we evolved to better styles of programming, where we have we introduced this concept of functional programming, where you can create a reusable block of instructions called a function. And as a matter of fact, the functional programming style is very prevalent even today, right? Like C language, the reason the C language is popular and kicking even today is because functional programming does have its space. Functional programming style does have its space. And as a matter of fact, so there is this huge cult of software engineers who even would argue, saying that functional programming style is much better than object oriented programming style. But then again, these styles are just preferences of each of the engineers and developers, so that's a debate on its own. But the point is, these styles, right, the linear style of programming, and then the functional style of programming, and now the object oriented programming style, is just that, is just a style of programming, nothing more, nothing less. For a computer, for a machine, it makes no difference what programming style you used, because all the machine understands is just binary, zeros and ones, right? So at the end of the day, no matter what style of programming you use, whether you use linear programming or even in Python, you can just write a script which is just a bunch of like 4 lines of code, right? There's no function or no style involved in it. It's just a series of Python code. So that many times is even called as a Python script, just a bunch of instructions written in Python. And then we even have functional programming that is written in Python, where you just make use of functions, and you don't go into creating classes and creating instantiating objects out of them. But at the end of the day, in order for the machine to actually do something, in order for the machine to understand your program, the software that you've written gets compiled or interpreted, right, into binary form, right, zeros and ones. So the machine is least bothered about what style you are using. The style is for us human beings, for us to manage our code better, and primarily for us to understand the code, and to be able to intuitively talk about the code with each other, so multiple people could work together in engineering solutions using software. So that's what object oriented programming is. It is a style of programming. All right, so in the next video we're going to talk more about the object oriented programming principles, and like how we can make use of object oriented programming in Python. Hope this video was useful, and I'll see you again in the next video. Cheers.